Welcome to another episode of Chefs and Guests on the Spoon Mob podcast feed. My name's Ray. I am your host. This episode is actually with Chef Brian Baxter, who's the current executive chef over at the Catbird seat. He's the fifth executive chef at that restaurant. If you're not familiar with the Catbird seat, it's a pretty unique concept. It started about 8 to 10 years ago. The first chef was Josh Habiger, who's over at Bastion. He's the executive chef there. It was him, and then also Ben and Max Goldberg, who are the founders of Strategic Hospitality. They own a couple different restaurants around the area. Pinewood Social is another thing that they opened. But they kind of started this restaurant under the guise of the chefs kind of being also the servers and kind of making a more connection with the guests. And it's been a huge success so far. I mean, like I said, Baxter here is the fifth one. He's the first one with kind of like a Southern cuisine background. So that's kind of unique to the Catbird seat, but popped up usually on different travel shows. I mean, Anthony Bourdain went there in his Nashville episode 2 as well. So it's a really cool concept. It's above the Patterson House, which is this kind of elevated cocktail bar that's right below it. And, you know, that place opened first. It was like, I think about 2009. And Habiger opened that too as well, ironically. So it's got a decent amount of history. It's a super important restaurant. Maybe it's not at the height where everybody name recognizes, something like the French Laundry, but it's in that next tier down where it's helped revolutionize, a city's food scene. It was the first tasting menu restaurant in Nashville. It's really helped kind of push Nashville to the food heights that it is today, where it's kind of seen as almost like a foodie city. It's a foodie destination, a place that you want to go. There's numerous restaurants. I mean, I've been there, once recently, a couple times before, but that was kind of before I really got into food. And, even just the recent time that we went there, there's 5-6 great restaurants that we ate at throughout, our stay. And there's a whole bunch. There's a whole list that I have of places that we just never even got to because of whether they were closed because of COVID or they altered their concept, to more takeout friendly or something like that because of COVID, or if they just weren't open because of the tornado that they suffered a little while back too as well. So Nashville is just kind of this melting pot of everything now. It's not just, really a country music city. It's become a lot of other benefactors have come its way. So whether it's the income tax stuff or the food scene or just kind of the weather and everything like that, there's a lot of people that are flocking to there and Austin in particular. But usually what happens with the Catbird seat is a chef is usually there for about like 2 years. It's kind of a stepping stone before they launch their own restaurant. Baxter has been there for coming up on about technically it would be a year in June, I think is kind of when he was announced as the fifth chef, but they didn't reopen until August of 2020. So he's still got a bunch of time, and we kind of get into that and, obviously go through kind of how he got started, as a chef and his career and influences and everything. He worked with Sean Brock for a while, went to the Culinary Institute of America, moved to Atlanta and helped open a restaurant, then kind of ran into COVID. I mean, he worked at Bastion for a little bit before that. Then after COVID, kind of how the opportunity with the Catbird seat came about and everything. And also, he's a pretty big painter. He does a lot of painting, he's self-deprecating as most of us are and doesn't think, highly of his paintings or anything like that. But if you go on the Instagram account, like some of them are really, really good. And it's been years since I've done anything with watercolor. I was a kid, but watercolor is super hard because it just kind of bleeds into everything else. So you have to be really, really just like patient and talented and just mindful of focused on kind of what you're exactly doing in that moment in order to make something even come out relatively good using watercolor. And the stuff that he posts, that I've seen him post on Instagram, some of it's just flat out just like really, really impressive. So check that out. You can follow him on Instagram. It's at Baxter. So BAXTERD at BBaxterArt. So BBAXTERART for the kind of watercolor painting account, and then at the Catbird seat. The Catbird seat, they change over their Instagram whenever there's a new chef. They kind of delete all the old posts and then go into the new one. So they're not super, super active on Instagram or anything, but you do catch some stuff here and there. And when you do, it's usually pretty impressive. So we kind of get into, everything. And the podcast itself is about an hour. I think we originally recorded like an hour and a half. We had a couple different points where just kind of dropped out because of the internet connection, because we were doing it remotely because of COVID. But the only part of information that's missing when Baxter gets into kind of how he got into watercolor and everything, the artist that he's referring to that he takes lessons with is a guy by the name of Todd Saul, who is an artist in New York City, and I think his wife's career somehow wound up in Nashville. So that's how he wound up in Nashville, and they wound up linking up. So just for reference, when you get to that point in the podcast, I think it's about like a half hour in, maybe like halfway or so, just because it's not, he mentioned it, but he dropped out. And that part was like the only little snippet of information that we didn't get just due to the connection. But everything else is there. And it's a really cool podcast. He's a really awesome dude. Awesome food that they're doing down there. So if you've never had a chance to get to the Catbird seat, or it's something that you thought about doing, highly recommend it. It's super casual. You just kind of come as you are, but they do really elevated food, and they're always kind of tinkering with the menu too as well. And he gets in all that stuff too. So about an hour long with Chef Brian Baxter of the Catbird seat. Cool. Well, thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it. Taking some time out to come on the podcast. Normally, kind of what we do, kind of first half of the podcast is usually kind of going through your culinary career this far, how you got into cooking, like all that stuff. And then there's some other questions at the end. But I think before we get into all that, I don't know if the people want to know, but I still am a Patriots fan. So we got to enjoy Tom Brady for about 20 years. And then he went to your favorite team, the Tampa Bay Bucks.
Yeah.
And how was that, I guess, journey for you guys? Obviously you won the Super Bowl and everything. Were you excited when he signed? Did you were like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen here? Or...
I think after 5 years with Jameis Winston, I was I was definitely excited. I mean, I'm not one of those guys who like hated Tom Brady. We didn't really play him much, so it didn't matter to me. It's not like a Drew Brees thing where like sick of losing to him. But yeah, they added a couple pieces, but I think it kind of proved like how close they really were. And after those two losses, to the Saints, and just kind of see Jameis on the sideline, it felt good to beat him in the playoffs, even though I had nothing to do with it. But yeah, I had I was pretty nervous every game. But they're my favorite sports team. I got a Bucco Bruce tattoo, and I got the Pirate flag tattoo. So to see them win and to see the Lightning win, those were huge for me.
The Rays were close, but
the Rays were close. For a team that won't spend any money, they have the worst probably owner in sports. But yeah, it just sucks. It's like the year that you can't go watch any of the games. We go back and win 2 championships. So
on a normal year, do you get to go to like one Bucks game a year or something like that?
The last 2 years, yes, because they played here and lost by like 3, and then the year they started out 2-0 or 3-0. I flew down and went to a Monday night game against Pittsburgh with my dad, and they lost. So I haven't gotten to see them win in person since I was a kid. So, this would have been the year. But
yeah, I don't know what their schedule is next year, but
yeah, I think they won't play Tennessee up here again for a while. And then it's cool now that the Lightning are in the same division as the Preds, but it's very limited on how many people can go. And we just had a baby, so I'm not really getting out of the house.
Yeah, I'd say probably like the next closest market would probably be Atlanta if they ever played like the Falcons or something like that.
Yeah, so we'll always play a home and away there. So I could drive down to Atlanta,
yeah,
for that, which isn't a bad, 3.5 hours. And I have friends down there still. So
yeah,
it's possible. We'll see what happens this year if things open back up or.
Right. But yeah, we'll get it. I got a chance to eat at the Catbird seat a couple months ago. I had a fantastic experience. It was awesome. And that's kind of why I wanted to reach out and have you on the podcast and everything. But we'll start, you're from St. Petersburg, Florida, but how did you kind of get into cooking? Was that something that was just family oriented when you were growing up, or just kind of first job and fell into it?
My mom says that I was always messing around in the kitchen because she ran a daycare out of our house for like the first probably 3 or 4 years. I was the only child until I was 10. So there wasn't much going around. I just kind of had to find a way to play with something. I don't really think that's why I started cooking. Probably, I would say 8th or 9th grade, I started, I would come home and flip the TV on, and Emerald had just kind of gotten really big with Food Network. And I think Food Network was finally starting to grow, and I would just put Emerald on in the background when I was supposed to be doing homework and, pay more attention to that. So I watched Emerald like every day until I graduated probably. And then, the original Iron Chef every Friday or Saturday night, whatever it was, if I didn't have a football game, I was watching. So I think that's kind of where this, obviously I always loved to eat, but this passion for watching people create kind of sparked something. So, right around my sophomore year, I started messing around in the kitchen. And my grandma, she she cooked dinner for us almost every night because we moved in with her when I was 10. And she would get so mad because I would leave just like the biggest mess. I would use 30 different pans to make like this emerald recipe, so, but I was going to try to play, played football for 12 years, and that kind of, out of high school went and played football. And that was kind of a deciding factor where I went, was a school that had some kind of program.
Yeah, you went up to West Virginia to play college football, right?
Yeah, so I played at a school called West Virginia Tech, which is in Montgomery, not far out of like where Greenbrier is. So they had an associate program through part of the tech school, and you would do your internship at Greenbrier. So that was the goal: play football 4 years, get free education, get a little bit of experience at Greenbrier, and then figure it out from there. After my first year, just wasn't like. I transferred to a school in Florida that had their main focus was hospitality, because they were right outside of Orlando. Had applied to CIA because I knew I always loved New York, like since I had been traveled there in like ninth grade, and I was like, I'm just going to apply, and did everything. Never heard back, so I applied to Le Cordon Bleu, and of course they responded and were like, hey, you have to, if you don't start the next block, we can't promise you that you'll ever be able to get back in. I was like, oh man. So I had like literally this decision of a sport that I love and have played for 12 years, and my career, football probably wasn't going to be my career at this point. So packed my stuff up, kind of left. I didn't want to tell my dad because I thought he would be either angry or disappointed. But, obviously when the coach called and was like, hey, we can't find your son, he found out. So, it was a conversation we had, and he's like, whatever you do, I just want you to be happy. So that made it easier. Started at Le Cordon Bleu, and sure enough, 6 weeks later, I got accepted to the Culinary Institute of America. Did
you do any cooking or anything while you were at West Virginia Tech?
They didn't have any positions available in any of the kitchens, so I was a dishwasher in the cafeteria because I was the closest I could get to kind of watching what was going on there. But, I wouldn't say I really learned anything. I just washed a ton of dishes. Before I went to CIA, you had to have at least 6 months experience cooking. So I moved back to St. Petersburg and worked at a restaurant called the Wine Cellar, which is no longer there. And I had worked there in high school. The only job they would give me was a food runner. So my junior and senior year, I was the food runner there. But I got to work really closely with the chefs in the mornings, and learned a lot of just kind of organizational fit. Like I didn't know anything going into it, just kind of what I had learned in this first like skills 1 and 2 classes at Le Cordon Bleu. But they were just, the restaurant was busy. There's tons of offsite catering. They had a banquet hall like in the restaurant. So to kind of like see a lot of organizational stuff, I think kind of what I learned there. But I didn't have a ton of experience moving to New York.
When you were at Le Cordon Bleu, did you like it, or was it just kind of like, I got to do this so I can get into the CIA?
Well, at that point, I didn't think I was going to get in. I enjoyed it. I had a lot of friends I went to high school with and stuff that lived in Orlando, which also wasn't a good thing because we'd stay up too late every night. So it was good for me to kind of get away. And I always wanted to move, that's as soon as I turned 18, I was like, I have to leave Florida. I need seasons. I need to experience winter, a real spring, not like a spring that lasts 2 weeks. So that's kind of why, I made the decision and you're young and you don't, I wasn't thinking about financials or anything. I was just like, yeah, New York, I have to be there. So
what were like the main differences between like your time at Le Cordon Bleu and then like at the CIA? Was there anything noticeable, or was it just kind of like, yeah, it's culinary school?
Obviously, Le Cordon Bleu, I think it's much easier to get into. It's kind of one of those programs where they try to crank you out. For me, you get out of it what you put into it. So you could go to any program. Sure, you may have a better chef or somebody who, I don't want to say they care more, but maybe they take it more serious or have more experience at a different school. But the information's all the same. Not that anybody really looks at culinary degrees, I don't think anymore, but, CIA versus Le Cordon Bleu obviously holds a little more weight to it. Yeah.
So would you recommend anybody, like if somebody came to you and they were, like, I want to be a chef one day, would you recommend they go to culinary school, or would you recommend that to like anyone in your kitchen currently? Or do you think hands-on experience is more valuable?
I think it depends. I have 2 guys that work for me now that haven't gone to culinary school. One, kind of worked with me at Husk. He went over to Bastion before I had joined them. He's bounced around, gotten some good experience, and then most recently joined me from Smith. So he just has great work ethic. somebody who needs some kind of motivation might need to go to culinary school. Like if you're not dedicated enough to learn the basics on your own and do all the reading, I think you should go. We had a girl who was working with us who had zero experience, was prepping with us. We told her like the same thing, like we can teach you what you need to know, or you can go to culinary school, or you can work your way through different restaurants and pick up knowledge that way. As long as you're willing to put the work in and accept, you can gather that. So honestly, I feel like it's up to the individual. I don't regret going. Obviously, like it was super expensive, especially that first down payment at the Cordon Bleu and then CIA right after. But I do think I learned a lot of things, and I still apply all those techniques that I learned. It's repetition at like here, somebody's not going to make a bechamel 20 times in 2 weeks because we don't use that sauce. But if you understand how to build these different sauces, then you could throw whatever you want in the pot, So that's a tough question. A lot of people ask that. And I think it's, kind of just depends on the individual. If they want to take on the debt and they think they need to, and they want the degree, I say 100% support them. If they think they're dedicated enough to learn without, then, that's the route they should go.
I'm assuming you went through the French kind of program at the CIA instead of like the Italian or the Asian.
Yeah. So when I was there, they didn't have those other options yet. The only decision you got to make was you put your name in for a lottery for the final. There's 2 restaurants at the end, and you go to either the Scoffier Room, I think at the time, and I can't remember. American Bounty was the other restaurant, which was like regional American. And I had already kind of cooked that because I had worked for Waldy Maloof in New York, who was doing kind of Hudson Valley regional American kind of steak focused stuff already. So I wanted to go classic French. I'd never had the money to travel to Europe, to France or London or any of these places. And I really wanted to, I knew at the time that was the closest I would get to working in like a classic French kitchen, even though I was at school. So that's the route I went,
Then after you complete culinary school, you wind up going back to Orlando, right? You start at Blue Zoo?
Yeah. So I went to Blue Zoo in Orlando, work with Chris Windus. I think I applied to the Ritz, and I think I failed the personality one based off of a couple questions I answered. Like if you see a single mother stealing food, to support her kids, do you report her? Do you tell her to put it back, or do you cover for her? And I think I was like, tell her to put it back and give her money, or I don't know, something I answered, but I don't think they liked it.
Was that normal to like get like a questionnaire like that?
I think it's a Ritz Carlton thing. I don't think it was a Norman Van Aken thing. I think it was
okay.
To work for the Ritz Carlton, you have to, but it worked out. So worked for, Chef Windus over at Blue Zoo, which obviously was a Todd English restaurant. So then I got to kind of work with Todd when he was in town every once in a while, but we did a lot more events with him, I think, than most of his restaurants, at least in Florida, it seemed like. So, I got to go do food and wine with him at Epcot every year. And we got to go to Boston and do a dinner for Louis Vuitton one year, which was fun. But just like being able to like work with him, like I feel like, I had a chef tell me while I was at the restaurant that worked in another department in the hotel. And he was like, no matter where you work, you can learn something. You can learn how you want to do something or how you don't want to do something, So he's like, no matter where you are at every job, just make sure you're learning. So, not that Todd and I ever really cooked together, because it was kind of like he would come in and be like, what are we doing? And you'd tell him and he'd be like, oh, okay. And then he would do something completely different, like in the demo, And I asked him one time and I was like, I noticed, we were going to do this. And he's like, yeah. He's like, if you go in with a set plan and something goes wrong, he's like, then it will, kind of disrupt your train of thought and it can throw everything off. He's like, so I like to just come in with like an idea and kind of react. So I've kind of ever since then, like everything I've done has been like reactionary, like I've noticed anytime I have this, like this dish is going to be so sick. Like, I can't wait. Like it's going to be awesome. There's no doubt about it. And I test it out and I'm like, it's one of the worst things I've ever made, So if I just, approach it now, like this is the ingredient I want to highlight. This is another ingredient I think will be good with it. Maybe I throw a third one in there, and then from there I can play around, because, it's defeating sometimes if you have this amazing idea and it's terrible. So I learned that from work with him.
You started like staging at other restaurants on your days off, right?
Yeah. So the only place I could really get a hold of that would let me come and stage was Norman. And I know, I can't remember their names, but there was like the head chef at the time and maybe a sous chef had worked together at French Laundry. And they just did things so much different there. like little things like having two cutting boards for shallots or onions or anything like that, where you would peel them on one and transfer them to the other, just working clean, like much more organized. And it was just a completely different style of food. But going and seeing that, it's like you pick up on these little things from other kitchens. You're able to kind of take them back and, not that it was my kitchen to do this to, but at least in your station, you can learn better ways to be more organized or cleaner, quicker, efficient. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's kind of what I learned doing that. And then, probably, I don't want to jump ahead here for you, but around year 3, I was promoted to like a junior sous chef position. And I had been married at the time and had saved up a lot of vacation and PTO because I was working so much. But we had we had separated. So I was just work, party. That's all I did. And, I had what ended up being 4 weeks worth of PTO to burn up. So I talked to Windus and I was like, hey, I really want to go stage in New York. I have a friend who's like set me up at Poulet. He's like, well, is there anywhere else you want to stage? And I was like, I don't know. We had eaten at Maria while we were up there for Star Chef the previous year. And I was like, it could be cool. I don't know much about Italian food. So he set me up for, my 4th week to go stage there. And the goal really was, now that I didn't have anything keeping me in Florida, was to get back to where I wanted to be, to cook at a Michelin level in a Michelin restaurant in New York City. So staged at Poulet for 3 weeks, staged at Maria for a week. I had a job offer from both. I love everything about David Poulet and that kitchen. It was like, they had obviously a bigger staff than anywhere I've ever worked, but it wasn't like so big like the Maria kitchen where you have 3 or 4 people on one station just cranking out like 200 covers. I mean, these guys they were cooking, they were busy. It was like exciting, Chef Poulet would just show up like at 4:30 with like fresh cod that he went and got. Like, he's like, it's still in rigor mortis, like jamming it in everybody's face. I'm like, this is going on the menu tonight. And everybody come up with a dish, it's like, what the heck? This guy's a crazy person. But I was exposed to different ingredients I had never seen before, a lot of, different Japanese ingredients. And he was applying them all to these classic French techniques and dishes. And it just like blew my mind at the time. So I wanted to work there like just so bad. But after kind of maybe the only really smart financial decision I've ever made was looking at this room my buddy had for me in Bedford or Williamsburg, like first stop, how much I was going to get paid and then how I was going to get to work or do anything else. And I was like, there's absolutely no way. I'd have to ride a bike to work no matter what the weather was like. So I decided not to move up there. But as soon as I got back from New York, Jeremiah Langern from the Dabney currently, he was still CDC at McCrady's, had posted that he was hiring. So I was like, hey, McCrady's is hiring. And I was like, I don't have any PTO left, but would you mind if I went to stage this weekend, on my day off? And he was like, if I let you go stage again, you better come back with a job. I said, okay. To kind of jump backwards a little bit, the first time I staged at McCrady's was probably in like 2008, 2009. I was only out of culinary school like a year or two. And it was like nothing went right for me. I like cut myself as soon as I got in there. But the first day I was just, doing what I could to keep up, kind of helping Jeremiah at the time. He was a chef of party. So I was helping him on the fish station and I'm helping them plate. And then, Sean was like, he's like, see what you're doing? You're covering everything up. Make sure you don't do that. I was just like, oh, yeah, chef. The second day, Sean was doing like an art culinaire shoot. And he's like going to have me prep all this different stuff, so they're like, just make a laurel tea. And I'm like, what the heck? I'm looking around like, I don't, what's the laurel? I don't know. Trying to make this olive oil pudding that only Jeremiah had made before, but he was actually off that day. And I broke it, I swear, 4 times. And I like had to keep going to Sean and asking him. And it's just like, I'm like, I don't know. I'm following the recipe. These are the eggs I've been given, and it's like 5 eggs per recipe. So I had like blown through all this person's like what I thought were the right eggs, but then come to find out that Dano wouldn't give me the right eggs. They sent me to the other people, which were the wrong eggs. And it's just here's a thing. I still tell him that story, and I don't think he remembers it, but he still thinks it's funny. Went up at stage, got the job at McCrady's, and moved there in 2011, November of 2011.
So that was kind of like your first experience with like Southern style cuisine, really? Because I mean, Sean's like notorious for, local Appalachian food, just all these different rices and grains and stuff that you can't really find anywhere else. Was that kind of like your first experience with stuff like that?
100%. Well, Windus did a good job about sourcing local stuff in Florida. There's a couple of farms that we worked with pretty closely. It was like Pasture Prime, Wagyu, who did like all of our poultry and beef, and Hammock Hollows, which did some really nice produce. I'm pretty sure they were from like North Florida. As far as grains, 100%. When I first moved to McCrady's, I thought we were going to be doing this like molecular cuisine because that's what Sean was known for. But when he kind of had that epiphany to focus on Southern food, we showed up and it was just like completely different than what I thought, but definitely learned. I think the most important thing as far as cooking goes that I learned from Sean was definitely grains, like respecting grains. I can't tell you how many times like I've had like just beans or rice or something that's just not cooked properly. And I remember seeing those not cooked properly and what had happened. It's like, man, a good story about me cooking Sea Island red peas for the first time. I cooked them and tasted them and I thought they were cooked, strain them through a China cap, and we would fold like butter and salt and stuff into it and let it cool at room temperature. And then once it kind of settled to room temperature, you pop it in the walk-in so they don't like seize up too much. So Sean comes in, he's walking around, and my buddy Andrew, like we're prepping, he's like, Sean's going through your beans right now. And I was just like, oh man. So I'm there like, prepping. He's like, who cooked these? And I was like, gosh. So I walk over, I'm like, I did, chef. He's like, they're a little undercooked. He's like, the perfect point in like a bean being cooked, you should be able to smash it and it should be creamy, but should still hold its shape. He's like, you can see these are still, some of them are cooked, but most of them are still starchy. He's like, where's your pot liquor? And I was like, well, I strained it. He's like, where'd you put it? And it's like, well, I strained it into the sink. And he just looked at me and he's like, always save your pot liquor, and walked away. So, I kind of try to make a quick, I use veg stock, I think, and bruleed and onion and stuff, and get the beans back in it. And while I'm like doing all this stuff, I can hear him talking to the head of the meat station. The head of the meat station. He's like, why'd he throw away his pot liquor? Why didn't anybody tell him to save the pot? Just started ripping him. And I was like, man, I'm so sorry, dude. So it's like one of those lessons, and see someone try to strain the pot liquor. I've jammed them up and be like, yo, always save the pot liquor. But I tell them the story. But yeah, I mean, I think with any ingredients, just how he respects them. Obviously, the grains is one thing we highlighted a lot there. But I mean, the way he treated farmers, supporting local farmers. I mean, it's just like if a farmer was struggling, it was like, I just have, I got all these snook. Like we had this lady who brought us crabs all the time. But just bring us whatever you get. We'd find a way to use it. So, I think I learned a lot about kind of just respect for ingredients and for the people growing them in my time with him. I mean, not just at Crady's, but even at Husk.
So then how did like the opportunity to go to Nashville that come about? They were opening another location? So
they were opening a second Husk. Husk had done so well. There was a long line of people in front of me to become a sous chef at McCrady's. And I didn't really I liked everybody I worked with. I didn't love the people in Charleston. I had friends and stuff, and I enjoyed Charleston. I had visited there a couple times before moving there. Really loved the area. I love going back. But when I asked Sean, I did an event with him, and it was the first time I'd been alone with him. And we had a 2-hour drive to, this piece called Music to Your Mouth, this event in South Carolina. And we're talking, just I was nervous the whole time because I was new. I had already mentioned I wanted it, but this is my time to talk to him about hey, I'd really like to talk to you about possibly being a sous chef in Nashville if you don't have anybody yet. And so, we had a good conversation then. And then he really just kind of watched me, I think, for the next 6 months or however long. So that brought me to Nashville 2013. I think it was April 2013 we moved up here. It's just such a different vibe here because there were so many like chefs and musicians, artists, tattoo artists, entrepreneurs, just all these people that knew each other from going out or hanging out, or, you meet one person that knows someone else and they know someone else, it's just this giant network, but they're all very supportive of each other. And I was like, man, this isn't old money, Charleston. This is, this is cool. So I fit in really well, really quick. And I've loved it here ever since.
So then you wind up working at Husk in Nashville. Then eventually I think you become CDC, right? At Husk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I can't, maybe a year or so and promoted to CDC.
But when Husk was opening, that was a big deal, right? That was a pretty big deal in Nashville that Sean Brock's opening a restaurant here, right?
100%. I mean, it was obviously a lot of attention on the restaurant, obviously because of Sean's name, bringing it in. There were already some great restaurants here, but I think he was the first kind of person that had left and made a name for himself and was coming back. So, I mean, everybody in the SFA and food writers and all sorts of people coming in and out. So that's a lot, even as a sous chef, I experienced it at McCrady's as a cook, but as a sous chef experiencing cooking for those people, with Sean and kind of just learn a lot about like why certain things were said to you or why you were asked to do certain things a certain way. I think when you're it's a high level, it's not a Michelin restaurant, but we're still trying to cook at a high level. The attention to detail and everything's still there. So you're just doing it at a super high volume. So that was the big difference.
And then like over the course of, a couple years there, like, then it's like, it goes to this other level because you start, I think, it's best new restaurant in America by like Esquire. I think you get to do some stuff for like Eater on YouTube. You get to film something. And then you get named to all these lists like Southern Chefs to Watch, Eater's list of, I forget what they call it. I think it's like Young Guns or something like that. And then like a 30 under 30 did with all those like accolades kind of coming in, and it's kind of your first CDC job. Did that change anything in terms of like pressure that you felt or, style of cooking, or did it just open other doors eventually for you? How did you kind of navigate kind of all this like attention for really the first time in your career?
Yeah, I mean, it's the first time like PR had been a part of my life. It's hard not to, I think at the end of the day, you got to remember to try to stay like humble. And there's times where you have to check yourself or you'll do something and it will check you. You know what I mean? And I think with all that happening, I had an ankle surgery in 2017 and I was off my feet for 3 months. During that time, I, decided not to come back to Husk, which wasn't my decision originally, but, I had time to kind of like look at what was going on, look at where I was in my career, look at what I wanted. And, I wanted to do my own thing and not be under someone else's name. And I think, I think it was a good decision, but I think also like if it weren't for Sean, I wouldn't have gotten to that point, if that makes sense. So, not coming back was a good like reset for me. Like you're just a cook cooking food. You're, just remember that. Like at the end of the day, you're just cooking food. So Josh from Bastion had reached out to me. I took, my wife in there, my new wife, current wife. And for her birthday, we were just dating at the time. And he texted me the next morning. He was like, "Hey, you want to get some coffee sometime?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." So we got together and he's like, "You're my guy that's been with me since I opened Bastion's leaving. And I'm looking at kind of creating this chef cuisine position. Never really had one here, but, I just feel like I need someone in here who's done it before and can kind of help manage so I can have a day off." And he had never not been at the restaurant since it opened. So I thought about it and, talked it over and I was like, yeah, I think this is what I want to do. It's kind of a step back into fine dining, which I really wanted to do, like leaving McCrady's and cooking at Husk was fun and be able to see you can do something at like a different level, still the attention to detail, but it's just mentally, I think it's mentally a lot when you don't have full control over everything, when you're trying to hold everybody to your standard. At Bastion, I'd be cooking 5 or 6 dishes of my own with one other person who would be helping me, not, 10 dishes of my own with 16 people coming in and out, So I think that was the next step.
It was like a good first back.
Yeah. And, it was just a good mental reset, something I really needed. I think I quit drinking back in 2021 now. So, 2015. Yeah. So 2015, I decided to kind of live straight edge lifestyle. So, that was also, I think, something that helped, had already kind of cleared my mind a bit that way, but just to be able to step away and just a mental reset I really needed. Right.
Yeah. So when you had the ankle surgery, you wind up just toughing it out. And that's kind of how you start doing painting, right?
Yeah. So I still have a lot of issues with it. It's kind of one of those things where I always played through the pain because I had such a high pain tolerance that I worked through it for 7 years. And by the time I went to the doctor, he's like, "This is bad." But having not had anything in my system except for maybe some ibuprofen or caffeine for 2 years, taking this medication mixed with just the pain, I had a really hard time sleeping. And the only thing that would help me fall asleep was they had just put Bob Ross on Netflix. And I used to watch him as a kid back in Florida, and when I was little, he'd be on PBS, and when I was really little, I just loved watching it. my mom would never let me get oil paints, because they're so messy. So I never got to play with them. And I was finally like, you know what? I had been watching them for like a month, and I was like, he says anyone can do it, so I'm going to do it. So I bought all the stuff, and once I was able to stand up, I started like just painting along with him, and it was like this really good release or outlet. Yeah, I mean, because not being able to go to the gym and not having any other sort of kind of just mental release, it was big for me. So then winter came, and once I got to the point where I could start just kind of trying to play around and paint outside, because it was literally just splattering oil paints everywhere, especially when you beat your brush. It started to get too cold to paint on the patio. So I was like, I got these watercolors. I'm going to start messing around with that. There's talk about going from like one extreme to the next. And one of them you're painting dark to light, and then now you're painting light to dark. Neither of them react the same. Watercolor is, you can understand what it's doing, but you can't always control what it's doing. A lot of people are like, you should just paint acrylics, and once you get that down, then you should choose a medium. And I was like, no, that's not how I do it. I'm going to go for it. So kind of during that time of, this style of watercolor I wanted to do, so I just reached out to him, and I was like, hey, we kind of chatted a bit, and I was like, do you ever do any workshops or like lessons or anything? And he's like, yeah, this is what I do. This is my fee. This is this. So we get together the first time, and I think I paid for like an 8-hour. At this point, I'm already working again and moving around and stuff. So we go out, and he does mostly plein air painting, so everything's outside. So we go out to Bear Creek Farms, and they have a lot of like just beautiful landscape there. So just start to the beginning with like, this is watercolor, this is pencil, this is brush. We started at the beginning and worked our way through. But throughout chatting about all that, he's like, oh, I grew up in New York. I was a touring musician for a while, and I worked my way up through kitchens. Then we started talking about food and people he knew and places he worked, and kind of had this interest of like, obviously love for culinary music and then art. And he had quit his professional job and was like, I'm going to be doing art full time. So kind of through that first lesson, I did another like short lesson with him. And then one time I was just like, hey, can I come out and paint with you sometime? So I went out and did a plein air painting with him, and he was giving me little pointers, throughout the whole process. And, the elements are in full control when you're painting outside. So my easel blew away. My painting was over but it was fun. And I was like, man, this is nice, because I don't really get out and go foraging like I did when I was in Charleston with Jeremiah. So it's nice to just be outside again and not inside a restaurant with no windows, 12 hours a day. And kind of through that, we became close, and he, has since become more like a mentor to me and kind of gives me lessons, and he does the artwork for the menu here at the restaurant, and did a lot of beautiful watercolor paintings that are in the hallway when you first walk in. But yeah, so I just like fell in love with watercolor. Like once it started clicking, even though they don't look good, like when things start clicking, you're like, oh man, this is awesome. But it's tough, because it's like, the first time maybe you try to make like a terrine or a pate or something, and it doesn't come out quite right. I'm relearning something totally new. And it's frustrating because it's supposed to be an outlet, but I'm determined for all my paintings to look a certain way. So now I'm trying to try to remember, it's not cooking. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just, you've only been really doing it for 2 years. And I took a year off when we had our first kid. So I wish I had more time for it, but it's just a nice release. And it's fun.
What do you do with the paintings that you finished? Like, do you just have like an attic that's just full of all your paintings?
Yeah, I have a stack of paintings. I have a stack of some that are just terrible that I'll just use the backup for something. Sometimes people will reach out and be like, hey, can I buy this? Or, I've had a couple people reach out and be like, hey, can you paint this for me? It's harder to do those things because I don't feel like I'm at like a really good level yet. So I feel like I'm never happy with a painting, right? Like some of them will be like, there's good things about it, but I'm never fully satisfied with it. So it's hard to sell somebody something that they want, but when they think it's amazing or they love it, then, it's like, all right, cool. At least you like it. Obviously there's things I would change about it, but I won't tell them that,
Yeah, that's just your competitive nature.
Yeah. Oh man, I can't get rid of it.
But that's cool that people actually reach out, and that's pretty awesome. So then you're at Bastion for a while, and then you go to Atlanta, right? Because you help open Cold Beer.
Yeah. So I met, with Kevin Gillespie. I met Kevin when we were nominated for Best New Restaurant in GQ magazine. So it was 7 restaurants or so maybe were nominated. We went up to Brooklyn. I can't remember the restaurant owner's name, but this amazing old jazz club in Harlem that he redid. It had a restaurant attached to it. It's beautiful space. I love old like 40s and 50s jazz. So it was cool to like go in there and have this big dinner and like, someone singing that sounded like Ella Fitzgerald. It was incredible. But that's when I met Kevin. And then one of the nights, Sean had an early flight. So he was like, I'm going to go home, but go have fun or whatever. So we did the event, and then everybody kind of left, and the only people standing there was Kevin and Joey. And they're like, you need to ride back to the hotel with us? I was like, yeah, sure. So go back, drop the stuff off, and then kind of did a late night tour of New York till probably 4 a.m. with the two of them, which was fun. And then Kevin and I kind of just kept in touch after that. I went down and cooked a gun show for like a hired guns dinner in 2017. And then we had kind of chatted a bit, like when he found out Joey was leaving gun show, he's like, I'm going to need to replace him. We're, kind of threw the idea out there. And I was like, well, I just started at Bastion. I'm not ready to leave. But after being at Bastion for about 2 years, he reached back out and said, hey, I'm opening this restaurant. Do you want to come check it out? And I said, let me talk to Michaela about it. And then, we found out that we were having our first kid. Her sister and their kids live down there. So we're like, it could be cool to, have some family with kids around. So we go look at the restaurant, decide that it's the right decision, and move down in May of 2019. So I'm coming from a 24-seat restaurant to a restaurant that has 130 plus seats downstairs and another 100 and something upstairs, plus patio, plus a beer garden. So, you could probably fill that thing with 500 people. So it was an adjustment.
Was that the most difficult menu development that you've done so far? Because wasn't the whole concept that it was like cocktails paired with the ingredients that were used in the dishes?
Yeah, so it was definitely a different way of approaching a menu because I work closely with Mercedes O'Brien, the bar manager, and it was kind of back and forth. Like she would be like, hey, what cocktail ideas are some dishes I have an idea for? And we kind of were able to create this menu with 15 cocktails, 15 beers, and 15 dishes. And each one had something that would go with it. And I think the plan was that people would come in off the Beltline, which is the cuts through the city, would walk through and sometimes drink their way down or whatever it might be. And then the idea was because they were big tables, because most people traveled in groups, table of 5, 6, 8, 10, whatever, come in and order, pretty much the whole menu 1, 2, 3 times over. And they weren't exactly ordering that way. Some people would and some people wouldn't. They'd come in and get like, oh, I'm going to get this appetizer. And we're like, well, it's really meant to be shared. Nothing's really big. So after the first couple months, we realized like, hey, we got to throw some like the heavier dishes need to be bigger portions so we can charge more. And people didn't blink an eye at it. They would still come in and order like one of these, and then the Duck Wellington or the ticket price just went up. So as soon as we kind of like start to get everything cruising, we get through winter, the patio's closed, spring's coming, and March 13th kind of happened. So shut the restaurant down on the 17th. And there, everybody knows that story for the restaurant.
So how did, with that happening, COVID starting, how did Catbird Seat come about? Because I know the previous chefs, they wound up kind of leaving earlier than what most chefs do. Usually it's like a 2-year kind of almost residency. And I think they were only like a year in before they wound up leaving. So how did like that opportunity kind of come your way? Josh,
the owner of Bastion, which is in the same restaurant group. And we, he came down and he had dinner, and he and his wife and me and my wife went to Staple House. And, I was just telling him I did miss Nashville, and obviously my goal was to give Kevin 2 years no matter what. But a couple of months after that, I guess it must have been around February, or it was probably February or March. He's like, hey, would you ever think about coming back to Nashville? And I was like, yeah. So, we kind of started this dialogue, and the goal was, I think, January of whatever that 2-year mark was, to try to get back up there. And, obviously things sped up a bit. So they're like, hey, this position is open now, it's still something you're interested in. And, I had a good call with Kevin about the opportunity. And we talked a lot about the changes that were going to be happening within, Redbeard restaurants, and the direction cold beer was probably going to be taking for the next year, just to be able to get through quarantine. And, it was a really good talk of, he wished me the best and said he thought it was a great opportunity, no hard feelings. And it ended up being a really good decision. I think, I told my wife, it's like, it's a restaurant I've really like always wanted to work at, just because being in Nashville, loving Nashville, knowing what it's done for people and their careers, and just the level of chefs that have worked here, to challenge myself. Can I cook at that level? Can I run a restaurant at that level? So it was obviously like a really exciting time. it's just like the greatest opportunity at the most inopportune time,
Since it was something that you always kind of maybe, I don't know, dreamt about, like, yeah, that'd be cool to be at the Catbird seat, or did you always kind of have like a loose like menu in your mind? Like if I ever got an opportunity to do something like that, I would probably do something like this. Or did you just have to completely, like, once you got the opportunity, just start menu development like from scratch? Because you're the first kind of Southern style chef really to be at the Catbird seat.
Yeah. So I think this is the first time that I've been able to figure out what I want to do and have full control of it, so it's hard not to look back at like the resumes of all the people that have been chefs here and see what kind of food they were doing. And I struggled a lot at first with like Josh and Eric worked in fine dining restaurants and had their style. Trevor worked at Noma, had his style. Ryan worked at all of these amazing restaurants and, Michelin restaurants and Noma and French Laundry and had his style. Will and Liz worked at all these amazing restaurants, had their style. And it's like, what is my style? People are going to come in and compare what I do to the rest of them, no matter how different or how similar it is. And it's obviously, it was a big change from Ryan to Will and Liz, and it's a big change from Will and Liz to my food. You really have to look at it as like a completely different restaurant every 2 years, because it can be whatever I could serve cheeseburgers in here if I wanted to, So I kind of had to just say like, this is what we're going to do. And it's hard because like, it's an industry where people are going to judge your food. Everybody's a critic, right? Everybody's going to have something to say no matter what. So cook what you want, try to make it as delicious as possible. And this is your interpretation of how it's supposed to be served. If somebody thinks it needs more lemon or whatever, like that's fine. That's their palate. But this is how I think it's supposed to be served. I'm tasting everything. I'm touching everything. It's a very small staff. And once I kind of was okay with that, I think it was easier for me to write the menu. And it's been easier each season to kind of start, realizing what we can do in the space and, what we can get away with or different things like that. I really like to cook things a la minute. So it's pretty hectic, like every dish for the most part, except for a couple, are like, you're cooking at least one, if not everything on the dish. Like, and we only have 4 burners. So, it's just pots and pans everywhere. But that's kind of like applying what I learned from Todd English. This is what we got. So just wing it, I'll be like, hey, this dish is going on the menu tonight. I don't really know what else is going in it, but this is what I got so far. So we'll taste it. And then the first service is usually rough, and I'm sure the guys hate it. But if I have this dish I think is incredible and I like it, and 50% of the people don't like it, then it's not a good dish. So that allows us to be able to make these changes throughout service. If, we clear the first 4 or 5 and they're like, it was all right. And, I feel like it needs this or that, like it's okay to get feedback from people. But I think another kind of goal with coming in here, it's like, all right, just cook your own food, cook what you think is going to be good. But most importantly, like with everything that's going on in the world right now and in the country, like just to be able to give people an escape from the outside world for 2.5 or 3 hours where they can just come in here, have a good time, relax, just forget about all the negativity. That's been like the biggest goal. And I feel like we've been able to do that and give people that, so it's a balance of wanting to show what I can do, but also just give people something that they can relate to.
Looking kind of back on it, because you guys, I think, reopened at like half capacity because of COVID and distancing and all that stuff. Was that more helpful when you guys first start getting rolling, that you have less people? Or was it a little bit of a hindrance because you have less feedback from less diners per night?
100%. It's definitely more helpful. Just some of the nights that we have had with like, some people just, it's their first time out in a year and they don't want to get up, but the people have been waiting downstairs for 25 minutes, like having to do that with 50% been a lot easier than having to deal that with a full dining room. But yeah, it allows you to get your footing. And just because of the way the place is set up, until it's safe enough for restaurants to be at 100% capacity with no social distancing, we can't, we really can't go above 50%, just what it is. And I don't want the guys to get too comfortable, but I think we're at the point now where like Wednesdays are rough because I'm going to change one dish no matter what every Wednesday. We could easily add 6 people here, 6 people here, 6 people, So yeah, blessing in disguise. Fortunately, we haven't had any issues here, but you're still navigating running a restaurant in close quarters with people during a pandemic. So it's got its own challenges, even being at 50%.
How do you decide which one it is? Or is it just like, this one's been on the menu for a little bit, I want to pull this one off and just do something else? Or is it just, I don't really like that one anymore, feedback? Or
it's a mix of things. I get bored really quickly. One of them, if we only have strawberries for a week, depending on how that year went, then we got to find a way to either preserve a ton of them or change a dish. So a dish might not 100% change, but components might change, which is easier for desserts. Or obviously the fish changing is one thing. Like, hey, golden tile's not very good this week. I got red snapper, stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I don't ever want to keep a dish on a menu, and I don't know that I want to bring one back that people love just to bring it back. But the donut will never come off, but it changes seasonally. It's just, we had such, people have just loved it so much that, I've decided it'll just always be there. And, whatever gets folded into the filling, whatever fruit or whatever we decide, whatever the glaze is will change. I don't know. I mainly get bored with the dishes I'm cooking and plating faster than the other one. We had menu with 18 courses on the second turn to the late seating. And that allows us to kind of, any other ideas I have that there's no room for on the regular menu, go on there. And then if we really like something, then we'll put it on the regular menu, and that opens up the space for us to just keep replacing that extended course,
So you change kind of the whole theme with the seasons, so roughly 4 times a year is the plan. Kind of, obviously you're changing stuff within there, but so it'll go from winter and spring.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously it's tough to be hey, this is exactly when we're changing it, because it's kind of, you don't know, the seasons kind of control themselves, so summer may go later, winter may go later, winter may come early, it's just kind of, we do the best we can. Another thing that's kind of, like I said, working with Sean, this respect for farmers is they struggle a lot. I had a close relationship with a lot of these farmers for being here for so long, and coming back, as restaurants, not every restaurant was able to reopen, or maybe wasn't opening yet. And it's I have so much pumpkin, I have so much tomato, I have so much of this, I'm throwing stuff away. So we just started buying all the extra stuff from different farmers of certain things. Be all right, we'll take 5 pounds. I got 25. And I was all right, we'll take 25 just to support them, because without them, we don't have food for the restaurant. So, I've tried to do my best to support them as much as possible. And it's kind of my focus has always been start as locally as possible and then kind of work your way out. Obviously I can't get fresh seafood here because we're not around the ocean. So I'll source that from Florida, or, even Maine or Santa Barbara. It's still supporting the United States and their produce, or whatever they can harvest. We're getting ready for spring right now. We have 76 different ferments going. So we're we need to make some space. So dump all the fermented tomato juice in here, and we're going to reduce it down to a syrup, or, all this different stuff to kind of make way, because, I foresee some of these farms probably still struggling a bit until everybody's back open 100%. So just got to make way for that.
Most chefs, at least all your predecessors, have been 1 to 2 years at the Catbird seat. So do you feel any sort of anxiety or anxious that the clock is ticking, because everybody else is usually done 1 or 2 years before they move on to open their own restaurant or something like that? Or are you just kind of in the moment, not even really thinking about that? Once it gets kind of closer, you'll start thinking about what you want to do next.
Yeah, I think you got to kind of find a little bit of a balance in your head for that, because, I have a family. I will need a job after this. I do have an idea of what I'd like to do. I have an idea of places around here I would like to do it. But at the end of the day, this is what's most important, so I can't get distracted by that. Like I said, a great opportunity at the worst time ever. It's just the amount of people that haven't been able to come through here and experience it, and that opens up exposure or investment possibility, all that stuff you're kind of missing out on, which normally is not the case at this restaurant. It's a little bit of a bummer, but at the end of the day, we have a job and we've been able to stay healthy. We've been safe, and I can't complain about that. They've been really good to me and have given me the opportunity. Every day I just want to make the best of that. So try to focus that way. But yeah, no, I've wanted to open a restaurant for years, right?
Yeah, I was just curious, just because it's a really unique situation with that restaurant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. As a 15-year-old, 16-year-old kid, I was I'm going to own my own restaurant one day. So there's always that thought. And, thank God I didn't open that restaurant 10 years ago, because it's not what I would want to do now. But
or a year ago.
Oh man. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But yeah, eventually that's going to be a conversation that'll have to be had, but it's just all about, figuring out the right time, and that year will go pretty quick.
So yeah, sorry, you broke up there a little bit. but you're back. So yeah, 8 more questions. Ask them to everybody who comes on the podcast. So we just kind of get, it's nice kind of compare and contrast and get some thoughts. Who would you say has been the biggest influence on your cooking career so far?
I would have to say just the amount of things I learned from Sean. Obviously, like growing up in Florida, most of my family on my mom's side is all from Kentucky. So I grew up eating these, at Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner and stuff, these like Southern dishes, but to see them refined and see the history behind them has been huge. Yeah, I'd probably have to say Sean. And I've worked with him the longest and was able to learn just a lot from, produce cookery, vegetable cookery, meat cookery, seeing him evolve as a chef and being a part of that evolution. And I learned a lot about how to approach a dish and simplify it and different little things there that I still apply every day.
What's the one kitchen item, it's not a knife, that you can't live without? It's a must-have in your kitchen.
I'm just trying to think. That's a good question. I want to say a spoon, because you could probably do pretty much anything with a spoon. A Coon spoon.
It's been a frequent answer. That and towels are kind of probably the 2 most popular.
Yeah, I didn't think about towels. Yeah. You can use your apron, I guess. You might burn yourself.
What's the one Nashville restaurant that's not your own that you'd recommend? So like the scenario I always give is, somebody was flying through the airport, flight got delayed, they're stuck overnight, they're going to grab dinner somewhere, but you guys aren't open. They reach out to you. Hey, where should I go?
Oh man, that is so tough.
You can also mention like a couple, doesn't have to be just one if you've got a couple.
Let me give you my top 10 now. I'm just going to say, obviously, Bastion, because I love the experience once they're able to get back with no social distancing. It's just such a fun speakeasy restaurant in there. It's amazing. I really love Locust, which is Trevor Moran's restaurant over in 12 South. Does dumplings and kakagori and just insane noodle dishes, which is one thing. Like moving back here was like, I'm going to miss like all the noodle spots in Atlanta, and he's doing some very similar stuff. So, and then obviously it's not dinner, but lunch. Anybody that comes to Nashville has to go to Arnold's Country Kitchen. It's a must. Those are like 3 of like the top. We have like 10 places we recommend to everybody that come into the restaurant that asks us what to do. But those 3 right there at the top of the list, I think.
Bucket list, travel destination, bucket list restaurant that you haven't been to that you want to go to someday?
Travel destination, Japan.
Certain city like Tokyo or Osaka, or just Japan in general?
Probably just Japan in general. My old roommate, Morgan, spent a lot of time over there, and just to be able to take a trip with him would be incredible. Restaurant, it's a tough one. It's hard because a lot of these guys, like as I came up cooking, now I really wanted to eat at their restaurants when they were there, or have stepped back a little bit. So that's what I'm trying to think about this one. I think I really want to try. Man, so tough. Maybe Saison in San Francisco. I've heard nothing but amazing things about that restaurant.
What's the craziest thing you've seen happen in a restaurant while you were working?
Ooh, man, I've seen a lot of crazy things. I'm just trying to think. There's so many different ways I could go with this. I think the craziest I would have to say is like people doing things with other people that they shouldn't do under the table, in public. We saw that a lot at the hotel in Orlando because they had these big tables and it was dim in there. And, you have probably escorts with these businessmen. Yeah. I mean, you see crazy stuff happen all the time, but like it happened a lot.
What's your food guilty pleasure? Like, what's the one thing, like if you're in the grocery store and like you're walking down the aisles and you're like, I can't go down that aisle because I know this is down there, or,
Fast food count?
Yeah.
I'm going to go Taco Bell.
Taco Bell. God.
Yeah, 100%.
What's your go-to Taco Bell order?
So usually I'll do number 6 beef supreme chalupa meal with a Baja Blast.
I'm the same. Okay.
Chicken quesadilla. And then I'll either they made it hard now because you have to download the app if you want to get the beef quesarito.
Oh, okay.
So some places, if you don't have the app, they're like, oh, we can't make it for you. I'm like, just charge me for a chalupa. I know you know how to make it. Either a beef quesarito or a Crunchwrap Supreme in fire sauce. Not try to house it all.
What's like your favorite dish, favorite thing you've ever cooked, kind of created, like looking back on it, you can kind of point to that moment where everything kind of came together. That's the moment where it all started to make sense.
As a young cook or just for that dish?
Just looking back on like your career so far, like you can kind of point to that moment.
So I had done a dinner with Trevor Moran when he was still here at Catbird Seat. We did 3 nights in the stables behind Husk, and Sean came in for one of them. And I did a dish with dry-aged duck breasts with burnt eggplant, shiso, and black plum. And some like really nice eggplant, shiso, and plum locally. And he told me, like as he was leaving, he's like, that dish was executed very well, created very well, and made me proud. And then left. So probably there, and it was just such a simple dish, but there was a lot of like complexity to it and a lot of like levels of flavor in it. I would probably say that's where it kind of started really clicking on how I approach things.
And then last question, I'm an Anthony Bourdain fan. Some people are, some people aren't. But if you are, is there a favorite kind of moment, episode, scene that stands out to you, kind of looking back on him? Or if you aren't, I think you mentioned Emerald. Is there a culinary personality, somebody who's on like TV that was super influential for you?
Obviously, Emerald was super influential in just kind of helping ignite my passion for cooking. If I had to choose an episode of Bourdain, it was the one where they go to Japan and do the Cook It Raw with Renee and all those guys. And I also read, like every other young cook, I read his book before I went to CIA. I read his book and I read both of Michael Roman's book. And I think, honestly, reading Michael Roman, his first book, is what really, like before I started cooking, really made me want to go to the Culinary Institute. But yeah, definitely that Cook It Raw episode. It's just so many great chefs packed into like one episode in a place I want to visit,
Where can people find you? Instagram, social media, website, plug everything.
Yeah, Instagram, it's Baxter. So Baxterd. If they want to watch me paint mediocre pictures, B Baxter Art. And then, the Catbird, _Catbird Seat, I think, on Instagram.
And you guys are open
Wednesday through Saturday.
Reservations through Talk. Yep. Book
out about 30 days in advance. It's a rolling, kind of opens up every 30 days and books pretty quick. So yeah, appreciate you coming on anytime. Anybody who comes on, open invitation, even if it's just guys are changing over a new menu and you want to promote it for 10-15 minutes or something, just hit me up, let me know. Happy to help whenever I can. Like I said, had a great experience at the Catbird Seat with your menu in the fall and everything. Looking forward to kind of coming back and seeing what's new and everything too sometime here in the near future. Nashville's pretty close for us, so it's only like 5-6 hour drive, so it's not that bad when you can just kind of make a weekend out of it. And there's a lot of great places to eat and see in Nashville. So, looking forward to, everything else that you're doing and eventual progression and next steps and all that stuff for you. But we'll definitely be back and seeing you soon. And like I said, I really appreciate you coming on and hit me up if you ever need anything. Will do. Thank you so much for having me, man.
Thanks again to Chef Brian Baxter for coming on the podcast, taking some time out of his busy schedule and just, talking about his career and food and everything like that. He's an awesome dude. It was great to, even with a couple of connection issues that we had, it was still awesome to just be able to talk with him for, 60, 90 minutes and just kind of, no topic was really off subject. Everything was answered, open and honestly too. He didn't shy around or beat around the bush or anything. So can't wait to get back down to, the Catbird Seat. They change over their theme of their menu with the seasons and everything, and then tinker with some of the dishes there. So make sure you follow them on Instagram, reservations on Talk. So Talk is awesome because it's all prepaid and everything. So you just go. The only thing I think you have to pay for is any drinks that you get at the end of the night. And you can even start out, at the Patterson House right below it and pop in there. And they have like some small bites and stuff at the Patterson House, but you can get a drink or something like that. And, they'll take it upstairs with you too. So it's very like a Michelin starred kind of restaurant experience, but you're in Nashville and it's just kind of more casual. I mean, they were playing, the only music I really remember them playing was like Metallica at the beginning, I think, and some heavy metal stuff. And then that kind of transitioned out. But there was one part I forgot to ask him too, was toward the end of the dinner, and there was one of the other diners that was eating there, and they asked him about something about like where to get some sort of, I don't know if it was like Szechuan cuisine or something like that in Atlanta. And Baxter, and I forget who the other guy, it was one of the other guys in the kitchen, but they both kind of spent some time in Atlanta, and they were going back and forth about like, now that place that you recommended sucks, really go to this one and stuff like that. So that was pretty funny just to kind of remember that. Like I said, awesome restaurant experience. So make sure, if you're into food, something like that, make sure you go It's a limited residency. So like I said, I mean, they've done the fall and winter menu. They're on a spring menu now. So they'll cycle around again too as well. And maybe he'll be there a little longer since the previous chefs weren't there as long as they normally are because of COVID and everything. But it's not a restaurant that if you kind of have inclinations of going, like you need to go. You can't just wait and be like, oh yeah, next time I go to Nashville, like, because who knows when that's going to be. And he could be on and doing his own, restaurant or doing something else, with a different restaurant or something like that, whatever, he envisions for his next steps. But hopefully it's, when he does get to that point, I do hope that it's, a restaurant of his own that he's opening and sticks around in the Nashville area just because it's kind of close to where I live, at least for my own benefit. Other things kind of coming up, obviously I have the restaurant reviews on Mondays and Parts Now Known on Wednesdays. Working on scheduling some other, chef interviews for chefs and guests and stuff like that. Have a few kind of in the works and everything. Not sure exactly when they'll come out. So there'll be just kind of more announcements as we kind of get closer to that stuff. This feed will go relatively silent for a little while here towards kind of the end of May, just due to a break and vacation and all that stuff. So there'll be a little bit more probably coming out on that as we get closer to that too as well. But make sure you follow the Instagram account if you're not already following us at Spoon Mob on Instagram. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook too as well, but everything kind of feeds off the Instagram account. Make sure you're visiting the website, new pages and stuff like that, always going up, new chef bios, new course breakdowns, a whole bunch of different stuff. So always kind of check. I tell everybody check in there like once a week and just kind of click around and see what's new because there'll always be a new name at least once a week popping up in the chef drop down menu too as well. So but yeah, appreciate everybody listening. I hope you guys, enjoyed the interview with Chef Brian Baxter. Like I said, check out his art too as well. It's a really cool feed. He's usually, I feel like he does at least one painting a week, kind of, and he's super into it. You could just tell from the interview, like it's something that he is super passionate about, and he just kind of like lit up when we got onto that topic. Not that, he's not passionate about food or anything, but it's just, you could tell he's kind of got these linear kind of dual things that he does that are separate, but and eventually he'll, I don't know if he'll ever put any artwork in the restaurant himself, but I think he did paint like for the opening menu, he did like paint the logo, I believe, or something like that. I read. So, it's pretty awesome too, as well, that he's been able to kind of incorporate some of that into the restaurant, and hopefully we'll be able to, as things progress for him. So, but that's it for this episode of Chefs and Guests. So keep an eye out for the feed in the coming weeks with some updates and everything, and the Instagram too as well. Help spread the word, and we'll talk to you guys later.